Melinda, thank you for that inspiration and that challenge. And Nicholas, thank you for those brilliant insights. So I too am interested in positive social change, how to make things better. And my personal goal is to make significant contributions to solving major social problems. And I have a haiku that sums up how I think about it. Problems worthy of attack prove their worth by attacking back. These are the big ones. These are the problems that don't give in to timid efforts and muddling along. And I've always felt that way. But I didn't start my career as a change agent. I started as a soap salesman, actually as a sales trainee, and then on to a marketing position in the household products division of Unilever. And the game back then was to make your numbers, learn the basics of marketing and management, and fight your way out of a bullpen full of competitive assistants and into an office as a brand manager. And I learned my trade, and I learned a lot of lessons. And one of them was a day that a fellow brand manager, a guy named King, and I told you they were competitive, he was called up to the top floor by the president of the company, who said, "I saw one of your commercials on TV last night." And King said, "Really, what did you think of it?" And the president said, "I think your commercial is somewhere between useless and downright harmful." And I said, "Wow, King, what did you say at that point?" He said, "What could I do?" He said, "I argued for useless." Now, that's when I learned a lesson, and the lesson is that message testing is a key ingredient in any campaign. And then I went on to a very creative advertising agency, and these were the days when Madison Avenue was hot. But now, instead of laundry detergents and fabric softener, I was marketing dog food and cat food and kids' cereal. And life was good. But I had a continuing problem, and that was that I couldn't find social relevance in what I was doing. And one day a copywriter came into my office and he said, "We're working on concept statements for that new kids' cereal. Do you have any samples?" And as a joke, I reached into my briefcase and I took out this package of soft, moist, extruded dog food. And I threw it across the room to him, and he caught it and he looked at it and he said, "Yeah, we can sell that." And it was like what a famous coach once said about football. He said, "You have to be smart enough to play the game, but dumb enough to think it's important." Now, these were not dumb people, but things were just not important. And then something happened. I got a new account, PBS, the first time public television had ever hired an ad agency to build audience. And one of my first steps was to go to a press conference where a woman was describing a new TV program, Sesame Street. The speaker was Joan Gans Cooney, and she really caught my attention because I finally figured out she was using marketing concepts to talk about education. And a light bulb kind of lit up in my head. And I thought, you can use marketing on more than just packaged goods products. You can use it to promote ideas and causes and issues. And my search for relevance took me from Madison Avenue to Washington, D.C. to market the Peace Corps. And at the time, developing countries were asking the Peace Corps for fewer of those art history majors and more older volunteers with health and technical and agricultural backgrounds. So it was a kind of a repositioning. And our research showed us that returning Peace Corps volunteers shared a common fear, and that was that the sand would blow over their tracks and all their work back in the country where they had served would simply disappear. And it was a well-founded concern. How do you sustain positive social change? We're asking ourselves that question right here at this conference. And a friend with a similar marketing background and I wanted to start a company. And neither one of us had ever heard the word entrepreneur back in graduate school. But we just wanted to step out on our own. And so based on what we knew and what we were interested in, we started Novelli on a shoestring, I assure you, to apply marketing to health and social issues. And our first real account was the National High Blood Pressure Education Program. And it became the most successful national health behavior change program in the United States. And we contributed a good deal, but we learned a lot more. And the program had a measurable impact in reducing deaths from heart disease and stroke. And about that time, a few articles began to appear in academic journals about marketing and social behaviors, about theory and applying marketing principles to create social change. This was a more systematic approach to what we were practicing, because after all, we were soap salesmen who knew something about strategy and about tactics. But here were academic models and concepts we could use, and the academics could use us because we were doing it and they were thinking about it. So we teamed up and we learned together. And I began to teach social marketing in the MBA program at the University of Maryland. It was a great way to share knowledge, promote our firm, and find talented people. But marketing was not considered fully respectable back then. The Dean of Admissions asked a marketing faculty colleague to do a study on why students chose Maryland over other schools. But please, he said, don't call it a marketing study. And the professor said, okay, we won't do a marketing study, we'll do an enrollment demand study. And the dean said, good, do one of those. And as we built Porter Novelli, we had a mix of commercial and social clients. We grew and we prospered. And I was always happiest teaching and training and learning and practicing social change. We did a lot of work in the developing world, in reproductive health, infant survival, and in other areas. And marketing was a good discipline to apply to development, but it still wasn't respected as a practice. And I can recall the time one of our team was coming back into the U.S. from a family planning project in Egypt. And the customs agent asked her if she had been abroad on business or pleasure, and what was in that case that she was carrying. She said she'd been on a business trip with some vacation time, and she was carrying IUDs, condoms, vaginal foaming tablets, and oral contraceptives. And the agent looked at her passport and he said, Miss Greenberg, does your mother know what you're doing? Now, changing social behaviors was and still is a tough challenge. One day, a prospective client said to me that he had a social issue he wanted to tackle. And he asked me this. He said, how do you create a groundswell? And how much does it cost? Now, does anybody here know the answers? I didn't. I told him I wasn't exactly sure how to create a groundswell, but I was sure it cost a lot. Now, we were doing good work in cancer control, environmental protection, mental health, many other areas in the U.S. and in developing countries. But I still wasn't completely happy. I wanted to work on social change full-time. And so I decided to embark on a second career entirely devoted to public service. And so I left my name at the firm with my name on the door, and I went to manage CARE, the International Relief and Development Organization. Now, lots of CARE people were grown-up Peace Corps volunteers. And the essential challenge was, how do you create sustainable development in agriculture, girls' education, the environment, employment, and other areas in very poor countries? Sound familiar? And regarding emergencies like typhoons and famines and earthquakes and genocide, how do you progress from relief to reconstruction to development? We're facing that same question today in many parts of the world, including Haiti, a country in devastation only 90 miles from the richest nation in history. And now we also need to ask, will slow onset of deforestation and habitat reduction and other results of climate change alter the way in which we define disaster and the disaster cycle? And who's going to pay for all this assistance? And then I jumped into the tobacco wars, a glutton for punishment. Our National Cancer Institute client in my Porter Novelli days taught me what a huge return on investment you could get from reducing tobacco use. Back then, our job was to try to influence physicians and nurses who actually smoked at a higher rate than the general population. But now, in the mid-1990s, things were different. The FDA was asserting jurisdiction over tobacco, which Congress had never explicitly provided. The tobacco industry fought back with a vengeance, and all hell was breaking loose. A number of foundations and public health organizations wanted a single focus organization to support FDA and to counter the industry. As they put it, we need a tobacco institute for the good guys. And so we started the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. It's primarily an advocacy organization, and we fought the industry hard, engaged in state and federal policy work, recruited youth advocates to advance the cause, and did a lot of public and media outreach. And one day early on, I got a call from a friend at Burson Marsteller, the PR agency that had the Philip Morris account. And he said, Bill, he said, the industry's doing a dossier on you. And I was nervous, to say the least. I asked him what kind of information they were collecting about me. And he said, they want to know everything. He said, but especially, are you competent? Can you hurt them? And then he said, I told them you were totally incompetent. You don't have to worry about a thing. Well, the question of the moment was, how do you rally a nation, including policymakers, against an industry that epitomizes social irresponsibility, that has enormous firepower, an addictive product, and can hire half the law firms and PR and ad agencies in the country and around the world? I ran into a research director of Leo Burnett. This is the ad agency for Philip Morris, now called Altria, as you may know. And I asked him how he justified promoting cigarettes. And his answer was an absolute marvel of rationalization. He said, I'd just like to hope that our advertising isn't too effective. Now, we had a good chance back in 1998 to win a comprehensive tobacco control legislation. It would have meant many lives saved, FDA oversight over tobacco and nicotine, a big reduction in adult and youth smoking, and huge penalties for the tobacco industry. But we lost by a narrow vote in the Senate after long floor deliberation. The public health community was actually divided over the legislation. Some didn't want to concede anything to the tobacco industry, including limiting class action suits in return for supporting the bill. And so the whole thing went down to defeat. And the lesson is this: no piece of legislation is perfect. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But nobody gave up. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and I'm now chairman of the board, the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, and state coalitions kept working and fighting. And finally, in 2009, 11 years after the original legislation was defeated, we achieved congressional approval for FDA jurisdiction over tobacco and nicotine. It was a major victory and has been said many times, whoever controls nicotine will eventually win this war. Now, I continued my work in public service by going to AARP, the Advocacy and Service Organization for people 50 and older. And I went there for 3 reasons. First of all, AARP's powerful mission, to enhance the quality of life for all as we age. And I think everybody here knows that a great mission is an inspiring, driving force for change. And secondly, the demographics. It did not take a genius to see that 78 million baby boomers were aging right into AARP's sweet spot. And third, the opportunity to become the CEO. That came to pass, and I spent nearly a decade in the job. And AARP has something else as well, which is the necessary resources to pursue that great mission and to make a positive social difference. We faced many problems worthy of attack that we're attacking back. The lack of prevention of prescription drugs in Medicare, the need to make Social Security solvent for future generations, the importance of financial security for Americans as they age, and how to help people live as independently as possible for as long as possible. We achieved a great deal at AARP, and transcending it, all of it, was the strategic challenge of being intergenerational, to take all generations into account. Because that's how people think. That's what they want. Grandparents care deeply about their children and their grandchildren, and about leaving things better than they found them. Young people care about their parents and their grandparents. In virtually every culture, generations are tied together in a very powerful way. And this offers many opportunities for effective messages and appeals. Now, not long after I became CEO, the chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee spoke to AARP's board and management. And this is what he said: I want you to get out of the way so I can fix Social Security. You're going to get your Social Security checks, but I'm going to make young people madder than hell about having to support the older generation. Well, he certainly made us mad, but he didn't succeed with the younger generation. There is very little intergenerational strife or warfare in America, or anywhere else for that matter. As I said, the generations care about each other, and there's great hope and great opportunity in that. Now, a Washington Post reporter asked me, after I'd been at AARP for a while, he said, "What's next? Where do you go from here?" And so I said, my next chapter will be at a great university with a good gym. I'll teach business, and I'll audit anthropology courses, and I'll drink beer with the students and go to football games. And he printed the whole thing, including the beer drinking part. And it all happened pretty much that way, except for drinking with the students, which I don't do, and taking anthropology courses because I'm way too busy. So I joined the faculty at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown. And I'm teaching business and public policy, leadership and management of nonprofit organizations, and corporate social responsibility, all at the MBA level. And we're creating a new global social enterprise initiative for the business school and the university. Now, social enterprise is essentially about social change, although our previous dean preferred other language, just like the enrollment demand study back at Maryland. He said, "Bill, this is not Berkeley on the Potomac." He said, "This is a business school, so don't you have another name for it besides social change?" I said, "Sure, we'll call it social enterprise." And so we have two objectives: to develop partnerships with companies, nonprofits, and government to tackle big social issues, and to integrate social enterprise, throughout our business school to create tomorrow's global leaders in economic and social value. The timing is good. There's a trend among corporations to engage in social problem solving. It's not a new idea, but what's new is the focus among companies to make it a core part of their business strategies and growth. And student interest is just tremendous for this idea of creating social as well as bottom line economic value. And so, as so often in my career, I feel that I've had the good fortune to be in the right place at the right time. And I'm also chairing a new coalition to reform advanced illness care and end-of-life care in America. And in this area, we can really learn from other cultures, which often have a different, perhaps more accepting view of the cycle of human life, the virtuous cycle that Melinda talked about. I've talked about a few of the lessons I've learned, and I'd like to offer you a few more. First of all, to have a lasting impact on a large scale in most settings, we need to succeed at two major objectives. First, we have to create broad environmental change so that appropriate behavior is seen as normative behavior. This is the contagion work that we just heard about. This means changing the environment in which people actually live and work and play so that good health behaviors are seen and accepted as the normal thing to do. In most societies where media are pervasive, we have to utilize media strategies to influence the environment. And another key environmental change strategy is policy advocacy. And the second major objective is to focus on people's individual behaviors, to inform and educate and, yes, persuade them to take the proper steps to good health. This is a grassroots, village level, more personal, one-to-one level set of strategies. And this idea of environmental and individual level strategies are not options, and they aren't sequential. They're synergistic, and they need to be planned and pursued that way. And I think we have enough experience to say that media can be effective in broad environmental change. The media can produce positive changes and prevent negative changes in health-related attitudes and sometimes behaviors across large populations. Media campaigns can disseminate focused messages to target audiences over time at reasonable cost to influence normative behavior. And we also know that media campaigns can fail and fall short for a whole variety of reasons. And they tend to work best when they're connected to the individual behavior change at the community level. I said that policy advocacy is also very important. In Western countries, yes, but around the world. A good example is the work of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and the Bloomberg Initiative to reduce tobacco use. And they're centered on supporting policy advocacy among NGOs and governments in emerging economies in developing countries such as India, Ecuador, Mexico, China, Bangladesh, the Ukraine, and in other places. And they're succeeding at this in a number of ways. For example, in Niger, an indigenous NGO succeeded in getting a landmark decree passed that enforces a ban on smoking in public places, including aboard communal transport. And there are many similar examples of this. So media and policy change in environmental change are important. And at the level of individual behaviors, I believe that multiple strategies and approaches with many change agents can be most effective. We all know that community-level behaviors can be influenced by health workers, teachers, medical professionals, and others. And now, with the social media, the whole concept of change agents is multiplied with tremendous opportunities to connect as well as inform people quickly and inexpensively. Now, behavior is a wonderful thing. What people say and they do are quite different. And so there's almost no good reason to skip the upfront research and formative work. One of the most difficult things to do is to change behaviors and create a program from scratch. It's much more effective and efficient if we can link programs to existing social trends and attitudes and issues, attaching family planning to religious mores, sanitation to bathrooms for brides, anti-sexual harassment initiatives to soccer red cards, and smoking prevention to kids' natural aversion to fat cat tobacco executives are all examples. I want to make a key point here, and that is that I believe that the role of corporations in development is changing. When I was CARE, we often saw them as resource sources. But now there's much more corporate emphasis on base of the pyramid marketing and attention to to opportunities in serving disadvantaged communities and in developing countries. So multinational companies appear to be seeking and working in public-private partnerships and alliances much more than before. Andrew Natsios used to head USAID. Many of you know him, and he's now a colleague of mine at Georgetown. And what he's basically said is that the dual goals of sustainability and scalability have eluded many development projects. But new alliances, including with big corporate partners, are achieving long-term, large-scale change. And companies are looking for partners that can deliver at the grassroots. Many health professionals don't see this. They still hold corporations at arm's length. Quite recently, at the UN Conference on Non-Communicable Diseases, a number of NGOs argued that companies don't belong at the table. I think they do. We can't solve big problems unless we figure out how to combine interest and resources. And I'd like to conclude by talking about one aspect of behavior change that is an absolute constant, and that is the need for leadership. It really, really matters. As someone once said, leadership is the cause, and all else is effect. Leaders set the direction, and they take us there. It's not so much charge up that hill. It's more like come with me. And history is full of leaders who got mad about the way things were, and they got organized. Now, when the history of the tobacco wars is written, there's going to be a place for Dr. Steve Schroeder. In his early days as president of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, he recommended to his board that they invest heavily in tobacco control. The board was deeply divided on this, and the meeting was contentious. And the chairman of the board slipped Steve a note, and it said, drop the recommendation. They're not going to go for it. Steve tore up the note. He tore up the note, and he kept arguing, and he kept pushing for his case. He won, and the money was allocated. The result was national and state organizations that fought the tobacco industry to win major changes in the U.S. and to catalyze a worldwide movement that goes on to this day, including in poorer countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. I wonder if you've read The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and he died of pancreatic cancer. After learning that he had only a few months to live, he was invited to give a final lecture at his university. And his lecture was not about his academic work or about his cancer. He gave the lecture as a legacy to his kids, about achieving childhood dreams, about life's lessons, and about never giving up. He talked about running into brick walls. He said they were there for a reason, to let us prove how badly we want things. Now, health behavior change and creating healthy families and communities and societies is hard, sweaty work. We run into lots of brick walls. So we have lots of opportunities to learn, to lead, and to prove how badly we want to succeed. We know enough about behavior change to run around and over some of these walls. And we have to have the leadership and the courage to keep going and to run through some more. Thanks very much.